Is everybody in it? I guess so. Hello, everyone. So welcome to the Neurobiology of Gambling, Actionable Tools for Recovery. My name is Mariangela Malaya. I am the Assistant Executive Director for the New York Council on Problem Gambling. We're getting started in a few minutes. I'm trying to see. Okay. So if you have any questions that you would like answered during the session, please enter them in the chat box at any time. Dr. Chapman, who is our presenter today, will answer them at the end of the session. So Dr. Chapman is a clinical psychologist, an international certified gambling counselor, and a board certified clinical consultant for the National Council on Problem Gambling, and also a member of Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. She is an associate professor of psychiatry at Case Western Reserve University, the deputy director of the Veterans Addiction Recovery Center, and the director of the Gambling Treatment Program at Louis Stokes Cleveland VA Medical Center. So she speaks throughout the world on problem gambling, and her research interests include the relationship of gambling behavior with trauma, suicidality, and treatment engagement and retention. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Chapman.
Okay, so I am going to give up the admitting privileges to you because people keep coming in and I keep trying to admit all, but it's not unlocking the waiting room.
All right.
So you'll have to take that over because I'm not going to be able to do both.
Right.
I'm extremely talented, but kidding, not in that way. I'm joking. You have to have a good sense of humor in this world of ours. So welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm talking about an area that is near and dear to my heart, gambling treatment, and specifically, going to be looking at, I'm seeing more people in the waiting room.
I'm trying to get to the waiting room.
It's lots and lots of people at a time. So like I just admitted 17 people. So clicking participants below, and then when you click participants, it opens up a box and then you'll see admit.
And it says invite, but it's just showing me anyone to invite. Let's try this again.
They'll have a waiting room, and under the waiting room, it'll admit all. So maybe someone else can help with that. I don't want people to be left out.
Typically, there's supposed to be a waiting. Let's see this here.
Okay, while you work on that, I'll work on my presentation. So again, welcome. I appreciate being here. And one of the things that's interesting about this field is it's relatively small, but at the same time very big. And I feel like it's getting bigger every day regarding the impact of gambling and how it's out there.
Scroll all the way to the top.
So what we're going to do is start, and again, I'm Heather Chapman. I work at the Cleveland VA Medical Center. We're the longest gambling treatment program in the world, and so in that we've had a lot of experience working with folks with gambling problems. And I'm going to be talking today about the neurobiology of gambling. And one of the things that I wanted to do is make sure that I do something that's usable for folks and so hopefully I'll be able to reach that goal. So the objectives, excuse me, I'm reorienting myself here. The objectives are to be really looking at the neurobiology and the relevance to gambling behavior and sort of the design of gambling and what it does to us neurobiologically. And what do we need to know regarding gambling disorder, what that looks like, and then actionable behaviors useful that we could do that can help people with gambling problems. Okay, there we go. I was muted for a second. Sorry about that. So gambling, you know, you've gone over this, but just quickly, I just want to say, obviously, this has been around for a long time. There's some recording that's been around longer than actual substance use disorder or abuse, substance of abuse. Obviously, there's multiple forms, there's multiple venues, there's legal, there's illegal gambling. It's actually pretty normative behavior right now. It's very much part of our culture. I'm letting more people in right now. And you know, so one of the things to recognize is that this has been such a part of our culture for really a long time. And with the new expansion, I know that we're all very aware of how this is changing in recent years. And, you know, the range from gambling problems is 0.2 to 5.3%, give or take, okay? This depends on the group of people that you're looking at. It could be even higher, depending on the specific populations you're working with, you're looking at. And the criteria include tolerance, withdrawal, repeated unsuccessful attempts to cut back or quit gambling, and then the impact of psychosocial functioning, and of course, chasing. So obviously there's some overlap with what you see in substance use disorder. That is really where we got our start, is kind of looking at substance use disorder and how that might inform treatment for gambling disorder. And of course, the start of that started at the Cleveland VA, actually the Brecksville VA here in Northeast Ohio, and really kind of looking at those different aspects. There's obviously a few things that are really different. We'll talk about some of those today. Obviously, chasing is one of those. You can hear people chasing highs regarding substance use disorder, but chasing wins and losses or sort of have a different flavor to them. And we know that there's a vulnerability that's about 60% genetic, and because there's a biological vulnerability that's specific to addictions, but then there's this overlapping vulnerability to other mental health disorders that has shared genetics with gambling disorder. And that actually bumped it up to about 60%. Some say 66%. It depends on what you're looking at. And so again, the vulnerability is neuropsychological. There's vulnerability for people that have trauma experiences, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. There's vulnerability when you have, for example, as a very specific example, parents who condone gambling as part of your environment. There's vulnerability with folks who have significant poverty, with unemployment. But one of the major issues regarding making for a vulnerable group, a vulnerability in society, is access. We're really saturated right now with gambling, and that really changes the whole ball game. So, you know, I talked about this a few minutes ago, the gambling problems and cognitions, and you know, this is one of the major findings that's pretty significantly different than drug and alcohol use disorders. You will get some issues with drug and alcohol use, where people will have, cognitions of that this will make them feel better or make them into a, make their day go better, or cognitions that they're more capable of using it, et cetera, or dealing with it, et cetera. But there's specific gambling cognitions that are purported to really make gambling into a pretty significant issue, and is one of the targets of treatment, has been one of the targets of treatment, particularly in the last years. And so when we look at these cognitions, there's a lot of irrationalities present in those who gamble, and actually those who don't gamble. So irrationality, and all you have to do is do a coin flip exercise, which kind of simulates sort of a gambling thinking, the gambler's fallacy. Sorry, I keep getting muted. I'm not sure what's happening. You'll see people who are who have gambling irrationalities, whether they have a gambling problem or not. And you see this if you do just a coin flip exercise. When you do a coin flip exercise, even though most people understand it's 50-50 each flip, people will we have some people talking. So we have a number of different irrationalities, and they'll come up whether you have a gambling problem or not, despite us knowing better or not. And a lot of people I know have tried this. They've gone to a slot machine and figured out, okay, I'm wondering how I'm going to feel if I lose so much money. And people inevitably will have irrationalities pop in. For people with significant problems with gambling, these irrationalities are much higher, obviously, than people that don't have a gambling problem. One of the most significant findings in the last 10 years is the irrationality, or the gambling cognition that comes with near misses or near wins, or how people look at wins disguised as losses disguised as wins, and then also chasing, how people process that. There's been a lot of curiosity of what does that mean? What's going on in the brain? What brain systems are activated for those particular things to happen? Since that's such a huge part of our focus and treatment, is there something we need to be looking at specifically with that? This is a really great picture of the brain and gambling and neurobiology that you'll see all over the place. If you Google this, you'll see it over and over again. And one of the things, and it is interesting, I mean, there's fMRI studies looking at the brain and looking at the interactions of the brain and what's going on. But by and large, what we're finding is we're seeing these things, but we don't necessarily know what it means specifically to what we can do treatment-wise. And so what I'd like to do, instead of focus on all the pieces of what's going on in the middle area of the brain and how it's connected or disconnected from the frontal cortex, we're going to be talking about one specific area that has been demonstrated to be something that is fairly actionable in our treatment. When we look at gambling and decision-making specifically, and we look at people with gambling disorder, alcohol use disorder, and then having neither of those, people with neither disorder do better with visuospatial working memory, use of information of working memory, impulsivity, cognitive control when stopping action, when rapidly responding. So something when you're kind of doing something very quickly and they're able to sort of stop and think and not just sort of be on automatic pilot. Estimation of time, the capacity for planning, And one of the things that they've done is they've seen a lot of similarities between those with alcohol use disorder and gambling disorder, but there are some areas that are actually better in gambling disorder versus alcohol use disorder. And that's specifically the visuospatial working memory and some verbal information working memory, the ability to sort of work on some of those higher working memory contexts. This piece of impulsivity, this piece of planning, which is actually part of executive functioning, and this cognitive control, specifically when trying to stop rapidly responding, and specifically, obviously, with gambling. Those are all worse, and that's something that we're specifically trying to pay attention to, is like, what is with this kind of this impulsive and I would say driven behavior that we're seeing among people with gambling disorders and alcohol use disorders, or people that are vulnerable to gambling, and compared to those who do not. And what we're seeing that it is implicated with dopamine, and dopamine's one of those things that we're finding more and more about as time is going on, and we're finding that it's not really just about that feel-good neurotransmitter. It's about reward, but it's also about movement. So it's about motivation. It's about moving towards something. And early humans, we needed to seek out, we needed to have this movement connected to reward to survive, right? It was sort of a necessary component of survival. And here we are today, in sort of obviously a different world. So we do have a baseline rate of release. I apologize for that small typo there. Of dopamine. And dopamine just gets released on a baseline rate as we go through the day. It can be a little higher or a little less or a little lower, depending on what's going on. And there's like really a push-pull with dopamine. And every push-pull, every rush or little thrill, a little joy. Right now I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's kind of a sunny day, and that doesn't happen a lot sometimes here. And so that's kind of a little dopamine push for me, a little release, a little joy for me. Or seeing a puppy or having a nice cup of tea, it can give you that little bit of a feel of dopamine push or release. And you can be motivated then after you stop to get more, because you have, it's followed by a drop. So you have that little bump, you drop, and then it's followed by wanting to get more. If we're exposed chronically to something that increases dopamine above those national levels, those natural levels, it will fall significantly. So a big bump in a level of dopamine, especially if that dopamine is time after time, piece after piece after piece, and it keeps going higher and higher, it will be followed by a significant drop. So, there are actual costs in heavy dopaminergic activity or significant dopamine activity over time, such that you end up in a dopamine deficit state, because you end up in it sort of your body almost has like a sump pump trying to regulate itself. And we really need to have compassion for the struggle that people that we're going to be working with, or just knowing in life, may be in a dopamine deficit state and be struggling with that kind of regulation, and go from really high highs to really low lows. And you'll see this kind of this dysfunction, or maybe even a seeking out for regulation with these really intense experiences in order to feel something, because that dopamine deficit state will leave people feeling really dull, and not only that, but depressed and anxious. There's a lot of research looking at people with significant issues with depression, with PTSD, demonstrating a dopamine deficit states, which actually is interesting because we're seeing more and more, like the research that we just saw from Dr. Hennessy, we're seeing more and more research on co-occurring issues in gambling, and we're seeing, and substance use disorder, and we're seeing people have these issues that have a dopamine deficit state are have high likelihood of having issues with gambling. And so we might see this ourselves. You may find yourself picking up your phone reflexively. Perhaps others are looking at their phones and that might trigger you to do it. You see that at restaurants all the time, right? And then this, this behavior ends up being adaptive, being reflexive. And when something's super reflexive and you do it automatically, that's actually adaptive. We want to make as many things reflexive as possible so we have more brain space to take care of other things. And that was really helpful in our early days on this planet. But now it's less helpful because you're getting things that are being really reflexive that need to be more thoughtful. And we have things like, and I'm using something so simple, but something that we all do, pick up the phone, and being triggered by that. And really it's a cortisol trigger when we see a notification come up on the phone. There's a little spike of dopamine with that behavior when we pick it up and we look at it, and it falls when we put it down. And we've all had this experience, or many of us have had the experience. I had it in the middle of the night the other night. I was wondering what time it was. I was woken up by something. I looked up my phone, and then I kind of went in. I fell right in there and I started looking at something, and then I put it down, and then I felt like this little downturn in my, I felt down, and it was a dopaminergic deficit. And so I tried to sleep and I couldn't sleep. And it wasn't even that long. I didn't even give myself much time. And then I turned back to the phone again. And then it was a few minutes later that I compensated with my values of got to get up and go to work. So again, it's like really recognizing how this behavior works and what this dopamine spike and then deficit does to us. And so one of the things to really understand too is even anticipating this can spike it. And so this is kind of like the groundwork from which we need to sort of understand our work and understand even gambling and how gambling works. And when we look at gambling today, there's an ease of access, there's an ease of play, there's speed of play. The last time that I went to Las Vegas, there was this interactive baccarat play where there were, you could play 4 games at once. You could sit at this kind of arena and have piped in 4 different dealers at once. So this kind of constant quick speed of play. Which again is that piece that we talked about earlier, that when you have really rapid responding, that people with gambling problems have a hard time sort of making good decisions with that, because really what's happening is there's this massive influx of dopamine at that time. Of course, light sounds, attractive surroundings. I'm going to go back to speed of play. Back in the old days when I first started, there were actually these coins. It was kind of the strange time when the play was much slower, and you did really, machines were one line at a time. But now there's all of these different iterations of playing, and you can play multiple pennies or multiple nickels at a time, or multiple quarters or multiple dollars at a time, which obviously impacts that speed of play. Keno is similar. There's a number of different games that are similar. The other thing that we have that, I really believe, there's very little research on this, but the impact of people winning, the impact of people being together in a moment. So when people are together in a moment, there's a connection that's created. Oxytocin increases. And oxytocin, of course, is that, romantic stuff that you get. But it's bigger than that. It can be with many different things, including, mother and child, and us and our animals, and so. But it also can be in people doing things together, people winning together, or people losing together. I've recently had an experience doing something with someone, and I keep thinking about it. It was kind of a strange winning moment, and I'll explain it maybe later if I feel compelled to, but I might, because it's really sticking out to me as I'm talking about this today. Also, again, people winning together, people losing together, near misses and what that feels like, comps, the capacity or the hoping to get something, or to keep winning something, or keep up your level on your playing card, and then even anticipating, your comps coming on Sunday, and anticipating on Friday that's what you're going to be doing, and how you're going to be focusing your day toward that direction. So what can we do? What can we do with this? So, we've got these things, this gambling and the way it's designed. And I really had to make a decision, and John Grant's talked about this quite a bit. I had to make a decision about what I'm going to be putting in here that really is an issue of addiction by design. I've decided not to do it. Sometimes I feel like our research can be used against us, regarding, making better gambling for the folks that are making these products. But one of the things that's really significant here and really important here is really having a dopamine reset. And this is probably the most difficult part of our work, is how do you help people reset? How do you help people stop? And, in the lore, 28 days, some people say 30 days, some people say 90 days. So stopping at least for a period of time. And I really am a believer of motivational interviewing. I'm very much a believer of work with what people will work with you. I'm also a believer that if you're still gambling, it's going to be harder to reset the dopamine. So you've got this surge of dopamine, you end up in a dopamine deficit, it feels really bad. And the first thing that somebody wants to do is to get it going again, right? So that's what we see clinically. And this is a real issue. And all we need to do is think about ourselves, or I can think about myself at least at my 3 o'clock in the morning cell phone situation, and that yearning to grab the phone, despite telling myself, Heather, you got to get up in 3 hours. So again, it's that yearning ends up being stronger than the reality of, oh, that's going to feel really bad in 3 hours if I keep looking at this, and that struggle that is in that. So what do we need to consider as we're working with folks? Obviously, we have to recognize that people struggle with recovery. That recovery, I will suggest here that recovery is a culture that for most people, they don't understand. The average person in the community, I was just listening to some of the podcasts from Rich Roll, who's a guy in recovery on the West Coast, and interesting man, very interesting, very driven. I think very driven, very dopaminergically oriented human. And I think things can be pretty boring to him and aversive. I think people struggling with recovery a lot of times will struggle with that boredom. Some people argue that it's really not boredom, it's something else, but I think it's a combination of things. I think there is such a thing as boredom. I think it is the dopamine deficit moment. So things seem like really dull. I remember walking by our cafeteria in the hospital, and someone said, "Is this it?" I was walking with him. He was fairly early in recovery, and said, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "Is this it?" And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he was looking at the folks in the cafeteria, and he said, "This is it? This is life?" And I said, "Yeah." Yep. And he's like, "It's just so boring." And that boredom actually feels aversive to a lot of folks. And really being mindful of that. I think really being mindful of what that feels like. And I think as much as you can, offering hope that when this dopamine system is reset, that there's a way, to the other side. Certainly our culture is very forward tilt. It's very like, keep going, go, win, move, work, experience life, get out there. And for people in addictions that we're working with, that's really hard, because that forward tilt, it's so forward that they're leaning so forward that sometimes obviously they're falling forward despite themselves, and not even realize that until they catch themselves. So really recognizing this. Also, that all of our survival needs are met. So now so then what happens is people, because we don't have to work really hard on certain things, and even in the time, and I'm in my mid-50s, and in the time of being, a child, I remember my parents struggling with certain things and me doing certain things that we just don't do anymore. We have, other people doing them, or, if you need something quick, you have it delivered. It's sort of the world is in a very different place right now. I remember my dad talking about shoveling coal into the furnace. So again, we don't have to use that energy. We have much more time on our hands. I mean, and actually people with and without a college degree, those without a college degree have actually 40% more time than the people that have a college degree. So it's really astounding how much time people have, and we feel restless. We want to seek stimulation because we need that kind of dopamine hit. And that dopamine hit used to be like, having a garden and, shoveling your path and kind of going, well, that was cool. Look what I just did. Again, that restless seeking of stimulation. And then we have these things that are so easy that pull on us, whether it's, gambling or the internet, the way that YouTube is now designed since the mid 2010s to like kind of curate your list and pull you into the next video. It's just one of those things. And someone actually said in the last, or it was a comment, is there a machine that helps you zone out that's not gambling? And so that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that balance of the zone versus the not zone. The zone out, which is Calgon, take me away, let me feel better, or let's just zone out. It doesn't have to be necessarily a pathology there, to like feeling pain. I think that we are aversive to pain right now, or discomfort right now, such that we try not to be in it. And if we're continuously zoning out, we are throwing off this dopamine balance. and then requiring the zone out. So it's sort of that was sort of an interesting question. Pleasure and pain are collated in the same part of the brain. And again, it works as a balance to find homeostasis. So again, you have pleasure, then you stop, then you come down, you feel loss, and then you desire more. And it becomes this kind of like circle. When you have significant push of the pleasure, you know, high pleasure, you're going to be seeking it out even more. You're going to be seeking something out even more. Addiction is actually progressive narrowing of things that give us pleasure. And average everyday things don't feel pleasurable anymore. One of the most momentous moments, it sounds like a small thing in some ways, but one of these most memorable moments in my career is when I had an aftercare group, and someone, you know, he spent the time in aftercare still when we were still in Brecksville. And then he was kind of hovering afterward, and he said, I just need to talk to you for a second. He'd been in recovery for maybe 9 months. He was a former triathlete, actually had an MBA, really hard driving person. And he said, I felt something today. And everything seemed really dull for him for a long time, but he was really just sort of just getting through. He was living in our homeless program, and he was working at a fast food restaurant in the middle of the night, just cleaning. He just wanted something really simple. And he said, I think I felt joy today. I thought the word joy was fascinating. That's such a delightful way of saying happy. But he felt something different. So something was happening. So some other things were beginning to give him pleasure, because that dopamine balance, that deficit was repairing, because he stuck with it. And really being able to get pleasure from many things, big and little, is a good thing, and it supports a healthy tuned system. When we're working with folks, you see that their real focus is really the only pleasure is gambling, and giving that up just seems insurmountable. Like, how can I even do that? Like, I can't even picture this happening. So really walking with them, helping them picture this, I think, is really important. One of the pieces of habit research is interesting, and I've been thinking about this. There's an aspect of habit research that, when they talk about SMART goals and small goals and, you know, time set goals, and a lot of habit researchers are saying that doesn't work very well, actually. Otherwise, New Year's resolutions would be much more successful. One of the things that they said is, picture yourself reaching that goal. Actually imaginally walking yourself through it from before you're starting to do whatever you're going to be doing. To say, my goal is I'm going to go for a walk today, because I know if I go for a walk, it'll give me some pleasure, it'll do me some good. My friends, my family, my physician all tells me I should do that, but I'm avoiding doing it. Giving yourself that opportunity to think about it and picture yourself doing it from beginning to end, picture it, and will help you reach that goal. I did that with someone recently, and one of the things that was interesting was, it was him coming to see me and do a few other things. But one of the things that was interesting is he was able to say something in our meeting that he said he was going to try to avoid. And so I thought that was interesting. He goes, now I have to tell you, because he practiced it in his mind. The thing is, when you do that, whether you're practicing something, you know you need to do it. I know I need to go for a walk. I know I need to tell Dr. Chapman something. You're actually increasing it's muscle work for the frontal cortex. So that is what's really important here. And then you actually you're tuning your system. the other thing here is that people in recovery from gambling are incredibly wise. I mean, these are our prophets, really, because they have figured this out. They have been able to kind of look at these issues, these very difficult moments, and they've been able to grapple with them, and they've been able to come forth and work on them. And I think trust, something that, you know, I do the road to recovery, the road to continue to gamble, and the road to stopping gambling. And the road to stopping gambling or recovery, a lot of times when I ask people about that road, I said, well, what's that look like? Early on, the majority of people say, I don't know. I have no idea. And it's really, even though the road to gambling is terrifying, that road to recovery is even more terrifying because I don't know that terrifying road. I know the other terror. I know how to navigate that. I know how to navigate those dark alleys and potholes, but I have no idea how to do that. So again, this great wisdom in these folks that are able to come forth and share their stories. And we'll talk a little bit more about that sharing and what that does to the dopamine system. The key is finding these adaptive ways to support balance, resilience and flexibility, some pain and some pleasure. You know, and even us saying, like, yeah, sometimes life is really painful. Sometimes this is really hard. And I think some self-disclosure is okay too. I think too often we stay too closed down from our own pains in the world. I think we need to share our pains. I think that's what 12-step groups are all about. And it's about a day at a time. We're wired for 24 hours. Longer, we get lost. We get anxious. We get grandiose. You know, whatever. We get lost. And I think that's 24 hours a day. What wisdom is in that? Unbelievable. And linking then I'll even say 1 hour at a time, 15 minutes at a time. So our brain is wired for smaller segments. Our brain is wired for 24 hours a day because of the sun, you know? So linking, getting the chain of days, and really then thinking about that moment and those connections and what needs to happen in the environment. So helping people, you know, Navy SEALs, they take care of whatever needs to happen in the environment. They don't let things, they don't let things go. If I see a piece of paper on the floor, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to deal with it. I think helping people do that, helping people take care of what needs to happen right now, it actually, again, increases that dopaminergic activity in a positive way. Again, acknowledging life is hard. This Me Too thing, that was really important, and it continues to be really, really important. The Me Too thing has been going on in 12-step groups and GA forever, right? This shared suffering, it recalibrates expectation. I had a friend this past weekend talk about lowering the bar. We always talk about in our society, raise the bar. Obviously that sounds like weightlifting, but it's much more than that. And, you know, sometimes it's lower the bar, like, let's keep it simple, right? That's another good one. Intensity has to find that an outlet. And really, how does spirituality fit with that? And whatever spirituality is, how do we acknowledge our imperfections humbly, honestly? And we can start with developing a individualized set of behaviors, creating space between desire and use. So this is self-binding. So it's a whole bunch of study around this. And in the gambling world, we have lots of ways to do money protection. Self-band meanings change your route. If you're driving home, you drive by the casino, change the route to another way. Don't go to this store, go to that store. You know, just really thinking about how do you create space between the desire and use. That strengthens the cortex. There's really clear evidence that strengthens the cortex. that strengthens the part of the brain that's able to help us say no. It also, when you have successes in this area, it actually is a little bit of a pump of dopamine, a positive pump. So there's self-binding we can do too. We can do, and we can help our clients do in other areas of their life. This is one, it's an example of grayscaling your phone, a very simple way of self-binding. Developing an individual set of behaviors that creates that space, cell phone, removing apps, change to grayscale, craving for a piece of chocolate, sit through the craving, go for a walk, do 5 push-ups, watching the next episode, unplug, take the clicker and put it under the couch. I had someone actually tell me that they took their cell phone and they threw it up on the roof. So it'd be really hard to get because they knew that they couldn't get it for 5 hours because they had something to work on and they threw it up there. So that was kind of a radical self-binding. Saying yes to something is saying no to something else, but practicing that. When you practice that self-binding, when someone with a gambling problem practice self-binding with putting their phone on grayscale, they are changing their brain in a very clear way. It may not seem to have anything to do with gambling, but has everything to do with the frontal cortex. And when you strengthen the frontal cortex, you're going to strengthen the ability to say no to gambling. Our cultural narrative is find your passion. I've said it a million times. I need to find purpose and passion or whatever. This is really difficult for some people. Cal Newport wrote a couple books, So Good They Can't Ignore You and Deep Work. And the deep work, he said, basically turn off media. Can you imagine a world without email? I can, because I remember it. It is a very different thing. And what we do is we're switching things all the time. And in that switching, we're actually putting way too much load on our brain. And then again, so good they can't ignore you. It's not about planning or thinking what's going to happen, but it's doing something. It's actually starting something, and in doing it, you end up getting that, developing a skill and getting better with feedback. And it can be anything, and so in residential treatment programs, they do all kinds of things like have, gardens where people are working, or, we're going to go take care of the goats today, or, all kinds of things. And it can be really, really helpful. Linking to others, the 12-step community, group individual therapy. This creates this bonding, this oxytocin bonding, creates that spiritual connection, and it creates a dopamine hit. And some people say, are you addicted to 12-step groups now? I'm like, okay, so it's better than it was. What difference does that make? I think it's creating that connection that's really, really important. And I think particularly during the pandemic, it's been of utmost importance. Awareness of seeking intense experiences. Some people may be more wired for intensity and feeling filled and at peace or want more. It takes a lot to feel filled or at peace. The key is what's balanced and what's adaptive. The community can actually help keep that balance. It's like Johari's window. We have this blind spot, and sometimes our community can say, I think you're going in a little bit too deep. I will share my little experience, and I'm going to try to go for about 5 more minutes to leave question time, where I went and I did a cold plunge in Lake Erie, and it's cold, okay? And I went with a friend, that was my community. And she actually kept my balance because I wanted to go in longer, and I had planned to go in longer. And she goes, no, I think we need to keep it simple. And she was my Johari's window. She was my blind spot. She allowed it to be adaptive. The thing that was interesting to me is how intense it was, and how I don't usually have intense experiences like that. I'm a pretty boring person, but with that intense experience, I really found myself thinking about it a lot. And she has said the same thing, just really thinking about it a lot and wanting to do it again. So there was something really dopaminergic that happened there. Now, what the addiction dopamine community would say, be careful with stuff like that, particularly if you're prone to addictive activities or prone to doing too much. because you can tip your balance, because when you go really high in that way, you'll go really low in the other way. And one thing that I found, and she said this was going to happen, and it did, extremely hungry about a day later. And so it again, I was, it tipped my kind of biochemical balance in probably a lot of ways that I'll never understand, but I can still feel it. I think this is from Rich Roll, but it's from somebody in recovery, and I apologize, I don't have who it was from. I just heard it the other day. No matter how far you drive, you're the same distance from the ditch. And so no matter how much somebody in recovery or any of us have experienced success or something that we've been able to do, we still have a chance to fall. We still have a chance for you know, losing our composure or our boundaries or our guide. And it's important to have other people with us. We have, you know, one of the things is rigorous honesty, and you hear that in the rooms. You know, we have a natural capacity for lying. It was adaptive, and we needed to do that in order to survive. And poker players can really lie. And lying is one of the criteria for gambling disorder. And obviously it's necessary when resources were scarce. It's less necessary now. And I would say this is the one criteria in the DSM that's the most damaging when I talk to folks that are still have family members and so forth. They talk about that criteria is the one that gets them and their family the most, the lying. So this promoting balance, promoting awareness, fostering connection, truthful autobiography. I think timing of the autobiography is important. Don't do it too early, but truth telling is really important. Helping people tell the truth, not pushing them to tell the truth, but giving a safe space for people to tell the truth, I think is important. That stimulates the frontal cortex. It's been shown experimentally to do that. It caused people to be more honest when their frontal cortex was actually experimentally stimulated. And there's some hypotheses that actually truth-telling can actually stimulate the frontal cortex, can actually grow strengthen the frontal cortex, making us more balanced. This rigorous honesty, sharing vulnerabilities causes others to draws in others and creates connections, that you're not alone. Someone hears someone else's story and they feel connected to it. That's the step work. We're all connected. This increases oxytocin and dopamine. And again, I talked about the lying criteria in the DSM. In experience of unreliability, when we think about our clients and how so many of them have issues with honesty, feeling confident in the world engenders truth-telling, trust, and safety. When we have unreliability in our world, we're less confident, we're unsure, we'll lie for survival, and lying can become very ingrained and a really difficult thing to stop. So recognizing, challenging yourself to recognize that this is a survival mechanism for folks, and it's not about, you know, not about them doing something to us particularly, but it's something to walk people through, and really understanding, using motivational interviewing, developing discrepancy between the pleasure seeking and values, pacing, what are they ready for? Can you push too hard? Yes, I think you can. It can lead to increased anxiety. And what will happen with this group, when their anxiety is increased, their dopamine balance is off, and they will go for a dopamine push in order to get back into balance again. So being very mindful. Even the word denial, I would argue, is a really strange word, and I don't know if it's that helpful. It's a disconnect between the reward pathway and the frontal cortex that allows us to navigate the world according to our values and appreciate the context. What if you just can't see? Is it denial if you just really can't see? You know, and what I love about recovery, what I love about life, is we start to see as life goes on. We see things unfold during time. And I think we get wiser, hopefully, as time goes by. I think we do. Fourth step, making amends, is a very cathartic and rewarding moment. It's pro-social shame, and that's healthy dopamine release. And there's some helpful, powerful self-care you can do. Moving regulates stress. just moving, walking, jogging, riding bikes. There's a research study, 3 hours, 1 hour, 3 times weekly of walking and strength training for folks in methamphetamine treatment. It demonstrated increased dopamine receptor availability. That's pretty cool. Are we looking at screens all day? This actually triggers a pro-depressive circuit. Think about the casino. It's triggering a pro-depressive circuit. Light is really important. Looking at light at sunrise and sunset, it actually sunrise increases cortisol. Cortisol is good. It can be bad if it's overdone. And then at nighttime, it increases melatonin. Inhale, calm, inhaling once and inhaling again on the top of that big inhale, and then let go, long, slow, let go. That induces calm. There's things that we can do immediately in the moment when we're feeling off kilter that can actually regulate ourselves. The sleep and the sunrise, I just talked about the sun, and then panoramic vision, that shifts your thinking. There's actually some programs where people are told to take a break from gambling. They actually set it up on and there's certain countries that have that. Nova Scotia had that for a while, where the gambling machine will shut off as prescribed by the person who's gambling, like after an hour, I want it to shut off, and having that shut off moment and walking around can be really helpful. Now we know that can be difficult for folks. It can shift thinking, it increases problem solving, it decreases anxiety, it decreases depression, actually opens up. I think it's very primal. I think it helps us look for our enemies or the tiger or whatever that might be coming to us. Think about the elevator mind, think about when you're in an elevator, what happens to your mind and your body. What happens to your mind and your body, you pull in. So anytime you get into a larger, more expansive environment, you're going to feel better. Even rooms or buildings that have higher ceilings, people do better. They think better. It unlocks their thinking. They actually are more prepared or more cognitively flexible and creative in that environment. Running, walking, driving through space is calming. It's kind of the elements of EMDR. When you walk in space, and that's how it started, and you look around, it actually is a naturally calming moment. So these are all ways that we can sort of biohack into our brains with just some daily activities. Take the session out of the office and go for a walk. I know that some people won't be allowed to do that because of their bosses and so forth, but I'm a real believer in that, and I think it really does work. Because sometimes my guys won't do it unless I go with them, and then they're like, "Wow, that felt really good." Hyperstimulus is designed to, gambling is a hyperstimulus designed to hijack. It's to hijack time and money and commitments and values, strengthening the frontal cortex through community, through challenge, through shared vulnerability. That's our goal. And we're in this together, and that's a really good thing. So that's what I've got today, and I appreciate being here, and I'm going to stop sharing. I know I went kind of long. Any questions?
There are a couple of questions in the chat box if you wanted to answer.
Oh,
There was a question. It said, "Is there a high co-occurrence of gambling and ADHD?"
There is some study in that. Yeah, there was a lot of interest in that in the past. Actually, Dr. Lori Rugel, her dissertation was on that particular subject. So there is a co-occurrence. It's higher than you would expect. I don't know a lot about the specifics of it, but there certainly is a co-occurrence. Certainly with any co-occurring issues, making sure that you're appropriately treating the other thing. I am a big believer of treating things together. If you don't have the competencies in that area, treat alongside of someone else, making sure that you're talking. I think that's really key.
Okay, another question. How long does the brain take to reset following dopamine deficit, as in early recovery. And,
So yes.
and
For some folks,
oh,
for some folks, it can be really brief. It could be there can be significant differences in 2 weeks. It can be a month. But for some people, it can be a year. It can be months and months and months and months. So I think helping people understand that, really helping people with the patience of it, I think is really important. But it can take a while. And all you need to do is practice on yourself. I mean, I think it's really fascinating because I think we're all in this syndrome together. Obviously, some people worse than others.
and then can you say more about the findings of habit researchers?
Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to email me, I have a couple books on habit. I can email to you. It's heather.chapman@va.gov. And habit is interesting. I've been looking specifically. I was going to add a whole bunch of habit in here. I like BJ Fogg's work, Tiny Habits. I think one of the things that's really important with habit is linking habits with something you already do. It's really hard to start doing something new and different. I think when you link, well, BJ Fogg's work has demonstrated that when you link something that you already do, I make coffee every morning and I want to start exercising more. If I link that coffee in the morning with 3 or 5 push-ups, tiny habits, tiny things, it starts to develop a new habit. So his work is super interesting. I've been fooling around with it in our clinic. I do think that some of the old adages of habit and work on habits and so forth hasn't worked too well. So that's why I'm trying to kind of look at this, trying to take other research in other brain areas and make it relevant to the gambling world. I think self-binding is a really big thing to help people change their habits and their kind of reflexive, activities. So that self-binding thing is really cool as well. And that's obviously individual, like really helping people think about, how can I pull in some of these other habits I have to help me with my big habit, gambling.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of our session. We will be breaking for lunch and then we will return at 1:15. Thank you, Dr. Chapman, for a wonderful presentation. It was very informative and hope to see you all on the next session. Thank you.
You guys.